Welcome back to Axis of Truth on JNS, and Happy New Year. I'm Emily Schrader, and 2026 is off to a wild start, with nationwide protests erupting across Iran, and of course the fall of the Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. We'll unpack all this together with not one, but two special guests today, experts from Iran, including a former political prisoner and an Iranian from the Jewish community in Tehran. But first, the world's police. Here's the question that no one on the left seems to be able to answer when America steps back. Who exactly steps in? Now, much has already been said about President Trump's arrest of the Venezuelan dictator, Nicolás Maduro, and we'll address the details shortly. But first, we need to clear up a fundamental lie. Once again, we're hearing the usual socialist crowd scream about international law from people who have no serious understanding of what that even means. Figures like Mamdani, AOC, and Kasparian are condemning this action not because it was illegal or immoral, but because they're operating from a toxic, third-worldist ideology that refuses to acknowledge a basic truth of the modern world. Without the United States acting as the world's primary enforcer of order, the world doesn't become more peaceful. It becomes more violent, more authoritarian, and more dangerous. The vacuum left by American retreat isn't filled by peace-loving, diverse nations minding their own business. It's filled with dictatorships like Russia, China, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We've seen this movie before. In the 1930s, the United States and Europe retreated into isolationism, convinced that power politics were immoral and that intervention was provocative. The result was not peace. It was Hitler, Stalin, and World War II. Tens of millions dead because democracies refused to confront monsters early and decisively. History didn't punish American strength. It punished American hesitation. The United States doesn't lead because it's perfect. It leads because Western democratic systems, however flawed, produce better outcomes for human life than authoritarian rule. That is not moral arrogance. It's a fact proven by history, economics, and human rights data. This is not about spreading democracy for ideological reasons. It's about a balance of power and realpolitik. American strength contains worst actors in the world and prevents far greater bloodshed. And to those complaining about tax dollars, here's a reality check. Foreign aid makes up roughly 1% of the U.S. federal budget, most of which circulates back into the American economy. And if you're worried about wasted money, look at entitlement spending, which consumes 65 to 70% of federal spending every year. The United States doesn't have the luxury of isolationism. When America leads, tyrants are contained. When America retreats, tyrants rule. History has already given us the answer. And now let's take that concept into our headlines this week, which predictably are about Venezuela and Iran. So first things first, let's sum up Venezuela. Just days into the new year, the United States took decisive action against one of the most brutal dictatorships in the Western Hemisphere. On January 3rd, U.S. forces launched a precision military operation against the Maduro regime in Venezuela, striking key military and security targets, including a facility linked to Iranian drone operations on Venezuelan soil. This was not a random force. It was a calculated move against a socialist narco-terror state that has destroyed an entire country. Now, Nicolás Maduro is not a legitimate leader. He stole elections through fraud and intimidation, ordered security forces to open fire on protesters, and oversaw the killing and disappearance of thousands of Venezuelans. Under his rule, political opponents were tortured, journalists were silenced, and civil society was crushed. The result has been catastrophic. More than 1/3 of Venezuela's population was forced to flee, turning this into the second largest refugee crisis in the world after Syria. Maduro turned Venezuela into a haven for global criminal networks and hostile dictatorships. His regime functioned as a key hub for drug trafficking and money laundering and sanctions evasions too. Hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars were laundered through Venezuela by the Islamic Republic of Iran using state-controlled banks, energy projects, and front companies. The Islamic regime also established direct military cooperation with Maduro, including drone technology training and facilities operating in the Western Hemisphere within striking distance of the United States. And this is why the targeting of an Iranian drone facility mattered. Venezuela under Maduro was not just a failed state, it was a forward operating base for America's enemies. President Trump did the United States and the Venezuelan people a favor. Removing Maduro wasn't aggression, it was accountability. But the job isn't done. Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, is no moderate. She's a key architect of the regime's repression and a butcher in her own right. Propping her up would be a grave mistake for the U.S. administration. The world must stand with Maria Corina Machado and the Venezuelan people, not with the remnants of a criminal regime. This operation sent a clear message that the United States will not tolerate socialist dictatorships that export terror laundering money for the Islamic Republic of Iran and destroy millions of lives. But their job isn't done yet. Free Iran. Which brings us to my next story. The beloved Iranians are once again showing the world what real courage looks like. Over the past week and continuing tonight, tens of thousands of Iranians have taken to the streets across the country, risking everything to demand an end to the Islamic regime. They're being met with live fire, mass arrests, beatings, and yes, death. And still, they're not backing down. Now, the immediate spark was crushing inflation and economic collapse brought on by the regime's criminal mismanagement. But these protests are about far more than bread or prices. They're about 47 years of corruption, repression, and stolen futures. An entire generation that has known nothing but lies, fear, and poverty is saying enough. What makes this moment different is where it began. The protests erupted in the bazaar, once a pillar of regime support. When merchants closed their shops and joined the uprising, it sent a shock through the system. And more cities are joining every day. As of now, 108 cities have been participating. The chants on the street leave no room for doubt. Death to the dictator. And louder than ever, a call we haven't heard at this scale in decades. The return of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Now, the regime knows the danger. Security forces have been deployed in overdrive. Internet blackouts have been imposed. Ambulances have been used to transport security units. Hospitals with protesters are even being raided by the regime. And yet the people are refusing to back down. In response, Israel has made it clear that it stands with the Iranian people and their right to freedom. President Trump has also publicly expressed support for the protesters and directly threatened the regime if they continue slaughtering their own people. Now, will he act? Remains to be seen, but his comments matter because the Islamic Republic survives on isolation and abandonment. Now, every time the world looks away, the regime kills in the dark. Every time the world speaks up, however, it loses confidence and ultimately control. This isn't a protest wave, it's a national uprising with momentum, organization, and a clear political demand. The Iranian people don't want reform, they want the end of the Islamic Republic and the reclaiming of their country. The question now isn't whether the Iranian people are ready. They've proven that they are. The question is whether the world will stand with them this time or yet again betray them. And now to give us a deeper look at the reality inside Iran right now and the state of the protest movement, we're joined by Naveed Mohabbi, a longtime democracy advocate, Iran expert, and former political prisoner of the Islamic Republic. Now, he previously served as the policy director at the National Union for Democracy in Iran, NUFTI, where he focused on Iran policy, advocacy, and democratic transition planning. He's also worked as a media analyst at the U.S. Department of State and a comms specialist at the Department of Homeland Security. Naveed co-authored the foreign policy and security sections of the Iran Prosperity Project, led by Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, which we'll speak about in a minute, and he regularly briefs journalists and policymakers on protests inside Iran and regional security dynamics. Naveed, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here on Axis of Truth. Now, to start from what you're seeing inside of Iran right now, I know you're speaking to a lot of people on the ground. How widespread are these protests and how coordinated are they compared to the previous uprisings that we've seen?
Thank you for having me on, Emily. I think the protests uh, have been growing over the past 8 days, and despite repeated threats from the Islamic Republic, people are continuing to come out with remarkable courage, and we are seeing demonstrated reported in more than 60 cities, and even some outlets say that it's in more than 90 cities protests happening. I think it's important not to view these protests in isolation. What's happening right now is is part of a much longer trajectory. This is effectively the fourth time that people are coming to the street, the first time being in 2017, and then 2019, 2021, and now. And you see each time these protests have become broader, more political, and more socially diverse. It's no longer, upper middle class, or lower class. Everyone is coming to the street, and I think that the pro-democracy movement inside Iran has really never gone away. It's been going on for almost 8 years, and it's evolving. And as you can see, the cost has also been enormous over the past years. Past 8 years, my estimate is that more than 3,500 people have lost their lives. And as people are um, going to the street once again, I think that the history of the past 8 years is present in their mind, and that's why we are seeing that people are more determined to confront the Islamic Republic once again.
Now, this regime, as we've seen, is using live fire. They're making mass arrests. They're intimidating or attempting to the protests. Is the level of brutality that we're seeing, is it a sign of confidence of the regime or desperation? And how brutal has the crackdown been thus far after what is now over a week of protesting?
As you probably saw in the news, more than 25 people have been killed by the regime. I think the crackdown intensified over the past 3 days, especially yesterday after Khamenei's speech. That's his method. For the first few days of the protest, he hide away. He doesn't show up in front of the camera, and then he comes, blames the West, blame Israel, blames United States, and calls everybody enemy, and then calls for crackdown. And the Islamic Republic doesn't have any solution to solve these issues, none. And when you see a regime that is out of options, in something like Islamic Republic, they always fall back on repression, and that's what we are seeing at the moment. I always emphasize that this regime has no solution to resolve people's issues. What that means is that protest is going to happen again and again. It's either people are going to win, or the regime is going to, uh, once again oppress people. The protests are not going anyway because the regime doesn't have any solution. That's something I always emphasize, because it's important for policymakers in the West and those who are watching the situation in Iran. Protests are going to happen again, even if it fades away this time.
Now, Naveed, this may be a little bit personal, but you yourself are a dissident, a former political prisoner who was persecuted by this same regime. Can you explain a little bit to our viewers what the Islamic Republic does to dissidents, to some of these protesters when they are arrested? I mean, what are they facing?
I was arrested myself twice on the street and once at my home. And to be honest, because of that experience, watching these arrest videos is deeply traumatizing for me. And I think for everyone who knows me and my posts on social media, I'm an analyst, but I get emotional. And sometimes even I get desperate. When you're arrested in the street in Iran, your entire life and your family's life can change in an instant. There's a real risk of beating, torture, losing your job, being expelled from a school or your workplace. We already see security forces brutally beating people. You watch these videos and even shooting at protesters in public. They're once again shooting at people's eyes. Protesters are being um, blinded. You can only imagine, what happens once someone is taken in detention, what they're doing in front of cameras, in front of the public, what they would be capable of doing um, inside the regime's prisons. And that's why I think that what protesters are doing is remarkable. It's extraordinary. They know exactly what they are facing, and they're still going out. Um, I'm not sure if you have followed some of the people that have been killed. They posted something. I'm going to the streets. I may not, you know, come back. Pray for me. we have to take Iran back. I think that shows remarkable courage from the side of Iranian protesters.
Now, what are the protesters saying on the streets today? What are they demanding? Are they demanding reform? Are they demanding regime change? Or is it something even more fundamental about sovereignty or national identity? And what is the role of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi in these protests?
I have been asked these questions over the past 8 years, and when people ask me this question, what protesters want, I always say, don't listen to the so-called experts in Washington, D.C. Listen to the chants. The message is very clear. What they are saying, what they want, what they don't want. I don't want to repeat these slogans. I think everybody saw that, but across Iran, people are calling only one name over and over again. It's not in like 2 videos, 4 videos, 10 videos across Iran in every province that has been protested in 25 provinces in Iran. We have 31 or 32 provinces at the moment. I think that reflects a broad and growing consensus for many Iranians. The Crown Prince represents national unity and a credible alternative, and I think that there's a clear expectation that he will lead the transition period once this regime is gone.
Now, what is the role of Israel in these protests, if there is a role? And what are the people on the ground wanting to see, if anything, from the state of Israel?
Many Iranians today see Israel as a partner, as their bestie, as a close friend. I don't know if you have watched the videos that Iranians are making about Bibi Netanyahu, the songs and everything else. It's very funny. I think Iranians are increasingly, shifting from the past and looking at Israel very positively. They look at Israel as a partner. And I have to be honest, I think over the past 2 years or 3 years, the emotional and the connection between Iranians and Israelis has grown to an unprecedented level. That's something that you can clearly see on social media, in public discourse, and in how people talk inside Iran. Israel, I think, is viewed as a strong, capable, and intelligent country, one that has real capacity to help. You yourself have pointed out, I think, 2 days ago, what Israelis can do to help the people of Iran, and I couldn't agree more with what you have mentioned. I'm not going to repeat it again. And to my Iranian friends, while the Israeli officials may be relatively quiet publicly, I'm confident that there is serious work happening behind the scenes. We are average citizens. We don't have to know everything. It's not good to talk about these things publicly. And I think that at the higher level, there is a connection, there's a communication, there's a coordination going on. And I think that this kind of growing partnership have raised a lot of expectations from Iranians. Why Israelis are not doing anything, but I'm 100% confident that there is work being done. There is a serious coordination and collaboration behind the scene. And at some point, things I think are going to be more public. I think after October 7, Israel policy has changed. They see the Islamic Republic as an existential threat, not just their nuclear program, but also their ballistic missile program and the very existence of this regime. Israel can afford to fight the Iranian regime every 6 months, every 4 months, because once you strike them, they are able to rebuild their nuclear program or their ballistic missile program. I think that Israel understand that, you know what, we are done with this regime, and their policy have publicly shifted after October 7. October 7 was a horrible tragedy, but I think that it has also has also opened many eyes in terms of policy towards Iran and the very nature of the Iranian regime. Hamas would not have been able to do it by itself without the help of the Islamic Republic. 91% of Hamas funding comes from the Islamic Republic. So I think that Israel now, it's very clear eye about the nature of the regime, and I think that regime change is part of their official policy, even if they don't say it. It's part of their policy.
Well, I certainly hope that you're right, but perhaps that's my own biases. I do want to ask you, I know that you've done a lot of work with Nufti. How does the Crown Prince's transition plan for the day after the Islamic Republic, how does it answer a lot of Western concerns about instability after this regime falls? We know that a lot of officials they don't want to say that they support regime change because they're scared of a repeat of Iraq or Afghanistan. How does the prince's transition plan answer some of those concerns?
2 months ago, Crown Prince team led by Saeed Qasemi, they have put out a very long document, 140 pages, what they're going to do on day one, what is their plan in terms of stability for Iran after the collapse of the regime, how many elections we're going to have, for the first 6 months after the overthrow of the Islamic Republic, and the kind of relationship that the Crown Prince team is seeking with Israel and United States. There are only two countries. I was involved in writing the foreign policy section of it. There are only two countries that this document mentions. Iranians are looking to have a strategic relationship. It's not just a normalization relationship with Israel. We have seen some normalization, but it's only on paper. What Crown Prince is envisioning is a strategic relationship with Israel on security, on coordination, on trade. So not only Crown Prince is relying on, defection, as you have probably, saw it in the news. There's a defection program going on. More than 75,000 people, from security forces have joined this defection program in cooperation with the Crown Reza Pahlavi. It's a secret plan, but I'm sure that Crown Prince definitely updates its international friends and partners on what's happening. It's not in the public. So I think the vision that the Crown Prince has is that we are going to rely on this defection and our people and the plan that we have, and more than 100 experts that are working on these documents, as well as our international partners such as Israel. I think everyone can see in the news how close and trusted the Crown Prince is in the views of the Israeli government. There's a close collaboration going on, but of course, we don't have to see everything on the news. And I think that when you put these, different factors next to one another, you can picture how a post-Islamic Republic is going to look like. I think I'm very biased. I love Crown Prince, but I'm also an analyst. I'm brutally honest. When I analyze, I have two characters, an analyst and an advocate. So I'm saying this as an advocate. The Crown Prince is the most popular figure inside Iran. But you can imagine over the past 12 years that I've been living in the United States, how Washington, D.C. views Crown Prince, these so-called experts, because there have been enormous coordinated campaign going on saying he's irrelevant. He doesn't have any plan. Nobody likes him in Iran. He has been in exile for 47 years, you know, but listen, listen to people, listen to what they are saying. Even sometimes our closest friends and allies, they had doubt about Crown Prince because all these so-called experts, the same people that, for example, uh, advised President Obama during 2009 to stay quiet, don't support them. The same very so-called experts have been saying, "Oh, this man is irrelevant. He doesn't have any support." I think this has been very frustrating, and I hope that what we are seeing right now in Iran, the protest, it clearly shows who has the upper hand inside Iran. And also for Israelis and Americans, I would say this. And I used to tell them this because some of them had doubt about Crown Prince. especially his popularity. I said, even if you think that he doesn't have the majority of support inside Iran, it's in your national interest to support him, especially for Israelis. After October 7, you could see Iranians all around the world marching alongside with Israelis. I saw the wife of the Crown Prince participating huge protests by pro-Israeli and Jewish groups in United States after October 7. She protested there. I was with her. There are only a few of us, but there weren't cameras there. So the Pahlavi's friendship with the state of Israel and the Jewish people, they don't do this in front of camera to to garner your support. I was with them and everybody saw them. Even when camera is not there, his wife, actively participated in those marches. I think that shows the level of, friendship and love that they have with the state of Israel. And I don't have to talk about Iranian Jews. They also love Israel and United States. I think Pahlavi supporters are the most pro-West segment of Iranian society, and Israel is not going to spend so much resources on Iran if this regime collapses and we have another um, groups that are anti-Israel or anti-West. But let's not forget this. Crown Prince of Iran acknowledges that not everyone supports him. He acknowledges that Iranian society is diverse. If you look at his plan, especially that 140 pages document, he says that in the first 3 months of post-Islamic Republic, there's going to be election. People get to choose the form of the government, and people get to choose the future form of government in terms of whether we are going to have a parliamentarian system or other systems. Every group, every segment of Iranian society would have the chance to be elected, to ask people to vote for them. Just because you are a minority doesn't mean that you don't have any means to participate in electoral process. Just look at Israel. We have two major, groups. We have, for example, better than me, but there are smaller groups in Israel. They can freely participate in electoral process, but nobody can claim that, well, these, the mainstream groups in Israel are dictators because they don't allow us to take power. A group that has the upper hand takes power. So just because you're not going to be the next leader of Iran doesn't mean that there is some, bad things going on, or the Crown Prince leadership is not democratic or something like that. That's just a norm. In politics, a group that has the upper hand, gets to rule Iran. But it doesn't mean that other segments of Iranian societies are going to be excluded. So that's a very important point. Even if you don't like Crown Prince, but you can still support this movement because you or your group, you're going to have a chance to participate in electoral process in the future of Iran.
I think that it's also important for the West to understand because it's very much in line with democratic values. I mean, whatever the people of Iran ultimately decide, I think it's something really missing from a lot of the conversations.
It's up to them.
Exactly. As a last question, I do want to ask you, what do you believe will determine whether this uprising succeeds or fails? And at what moment should the world be determining that, hey, this is the real turning point for Iran?
I think everything goes back to one question. How can we disable the killing machine of the Islamic Republic and their security forces and their capability to crush protests? I don't say these kind of things when I speak Persian to Iranian people, but as an analyst, not as an advocate. After 2000 19 protests in Iran, I have come to this realization that protest alone is not going to overthrow the Islamic Republic, because the nature of this regime is very similar to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya or the Bashar Assad. They're not Hosni Mubarak. They're not Ben Ali of Tunisia. So I think that regime change in Iran will be hybrid. It's going to involve Iranian people. They have to take the charge. They have to take the lead. They shouldn't expect others to do the job for them. So they have to be involved. External pressure, similar to what we have seen in the first round of Israel and Islamic Republic war, that 2 years war, that has to be another factor. And the third factors are a very small, semi-armed group. They don't have to be large, that can be effective to take over certain places, institutions inside Iran. These three factors. And I think everyone knows that. I think even many Iranians understand that protests alone cannot topple the regime. But Iranians have to be involved. Iranians have to take the lead, take the charge. If they don't go out and protest, I think Israelis would say, we can't do everything for you. We can support, but ultimately, it's your fight. So I think Israelis and Americans, they want to see some sort of uh, leadership from inside Iran in terms of people going to the street and protesting. But I think they also understand that there needs to be other factors involved as well.
All right, well, hopefully that's exactly what we'll see from the United States and from Israel as well, if they're not already helping out a little here and there. Hopefully they are.
I think they are thinking about it.
They're definitely thinking about it, yes. We'll have to see, but we'll leave it at that for now. Naveed Mohibi, thank you so much for joining us on Axis of Truth.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, I want to really focus on this issue with Iran because we are at a crucial time right now where the regime itself has the potential to collapse in the next couple of weeks. So I do have another guest to give us a bit more insight into the West's role and what is really happening inside Iran. Jonathan Sayeh, an Iranian himself who grew up in the Iranian Jewish community in Tehran, he has both personal and professional experience with this regime. He's an Iran research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C., where he focuses on Iranian domestic affairs and the Islamic Republic's regional malign influence. Born and raised in Tehran's Jewish community, Jonathan also took part in the 2009 protests against the regime before relocating to the United States. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us on Axis of Truth. It's great to have you with us. I know I've wanted to have you on for a while, so it's great to have you here. I just want to start off by asking you, how are Iran's religious minorities taking this uprising? Are they experiencing it differently than some of the other, major cities that we're seeing? And is there a specific center of repression that's targeting any of these specific groups, or is it more broadly applying to everyone, as we've seen so far?
Ultimately, perhaps the Islamic Republic's only indiscriminatory policy is its persecution of all Iranians. That's what we've seen so far. But when we talk about religious minorities, there has been a slight increase compared to the past of the regime's repression apparatus targeting them, whether it's Jews or Christians or Baha'is, which started after the 12-Day War because it gave the Islamic Republic another justification to target these minorities with the longest ever heard label, which is their perhaps operating on behalf of the Zionist entity, quote unquote, or their spies, simply because they have loved ones abroad. But when we look at the protest really tracker of the Iran as a whole, we look at different provinces. Similar to Women Life Freedom in 2022, we're seeing protests in every major city and small town. Rural areas are coming out. And of course, there's a major trend when it comes to specifically pro-monarchy and nationalist sentiments amongst all Iranians.
Now, what is the sentiment that we've seen so far in these protests that's different than before? I mean, you mentioned that there's a lot more of the monarchist calls or chants across different provinces. Is that significant? And if so, why?
It certainly is, mostly because the main criticism of Iran's civic movements in the past has been that they're not necessarily organized, meaning there's no leader of the movement as a whole. But now, if you look at the chants on the ground, and of course in authoritarian systems, it's very important that we pay attention to the streets because polling is inherently unreliable and the regime's media repression doesn't allow the real sentiments to get out. So when we look at the streets, we see that more and more increasing the youth, especially. So we're talking about Gen Z and younger millennials calling out for the Shah. Initially, in the past few years, the label was that it's mostly nostalgia, but that again is not the case anymore because they're actually going after the current Pahlavi, Reza Pahlavi, the Crown Prince, and calling for his return. So it is significant because the organization of really the protest movement is not leaderless anymore. And there's a very clear alternative to the Islamic Republic.
Well, that actually brings up a really interesting point that I wanted to talk to you a bit more about, and that is what is the role of the West, or is there any in this situation? I mean, Western governments often say they support the Iranian people, as we've seen, even from President Trump, but words haven't really slowed the crackdown that we're seeing thus far, the violence from the regime. What, if any, specific actions could actually help the protesters on the ground from the West right now?
There are a few things that could be done. One pillar of that is something that has to be long term, has to be systemic, which is enabling Iranian protesters to have access to each other and the outside world. And that could only be done through not even VPNs anymore. We need Starlink because when there's a protest in a certain area, they could just shut down internet entirely, as we saw in 2019. So necessarily VPNs do not cut the criteria for supporting the protests. We need satellite access. And there is increasingly more Starlink across the country, but we need more of that. But talking about right now, what needs to be done, I think the threat issued by President Trump specifically targets what you just mentioned, which is if you were to continue with your repression, there will be consequences. And we have not seen this, I guess, clear of a threat against the regime's repression apparatus. And we saw how aggressively they came out. And with the rhetoric coming from Tehran, we know that they're really scared. So I think Trump is the only president that the Islamic Republic genuinely fears in the last few years. They did not have the same concerns with Biden or Obama when it comes to really backing up Iranian protesters. But when we talk about public diplomacy of this administration, it's very, very important for the Persian language outlets to really cover what's going on the ground. We're not necessarily calling for endorsement, but US public diplomacy needs to reflect the wide range of opinions on the ground. And they are increasingly gravitating towards a monarchy. And we have not seen that being reflected by Persian language outlets. Specifically, I'm talking about VOA and USA Farsi, one of which is run by the State Department. So those two things are key. But let's say there would be another round of confrontation between the Islamic Republic and Israel. What we ideally would see is Washington's green light, if not support, for Israel to actually target the regime's repression apparatus, going after specific Basij sites around the country, RGC bases. We saw that towards the end of the war, they went after the different commands that really suppressed protests in Tehran. So more of that ideally, and green light from Washington to actually go not only after high-level officials, but mid-level crackdown officials that would really allow Iran's civic movements to grow and expand.
Now, Jonathan, I want to press you a little bit more on this issue because I'm wondering what you would say or what you would suggest. You mentioned Israel, but when it comes to Europe, is there more that the European Union, that Western democratic states beyond the United States and Israel can do to empower the people of Iran right now? I know we already have sanctions on the books. Some are being enforced, some of them not so much. Is there more that can be done from that European front?
Of course, when we talk about sanctions, of course, Washington can also implement human rights sanctions. We haven't seen this administration do plenty of human rights sanctions throughout the last year. Similar with Europe, even though they've implemented more sanctions. But as you pointed out, it's about enforcing them. So, for example, in the past protest waves, we've seen different weaponry used by the repression apparatus that originated from Europe, some from Italy. So more scrutiny on these companies to ensure that the Islamic Republic does not get its hands on Western-made weapons to suppress Iranian protests. That's very important. And that needs to be coupled with an effective public diplomacy, that we listen to Iranians as to whom they've chosen as their leader.
Jonathan, what mistakes has the West made in the past on this issue? I mean, there's many, but what mistakes have they made when engaging with the Islamic Republic, especially during past waves of protests? And what do you think can be done differently this time in order to avoid what the Iranian people largely see as a betrayal of what we purport to be Western values?
The first example of that was in 2009 when President Obama later on admitted that he was reluctant to publicly or even privately endorse or support Iran's civic movement in the 2009 protest wave that was mostly around Tehran, which was actually active on the ground at the time. But what we can do differently, as President Trump alluded, is that yes, we can publicly endorse these movements. We can actually provide the Iranian people with the right to free speech and freedom of assembly through whether it's rhetoric or whether it's through VPNs or different means of internet circumvention tools. So the avenues are really there. When we talk about Europe, what their failure has been is to be reluctant to identify or redesignate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. So the UK has been reluctant to do that. And often when we hear the rhetoric coming from Europe, it alludes that they are afraid of retaliation from the Islamic Republic if they actually designate the IRGC as a terrorist group. But America really proved that no matter how far you press the Islamic Republic, they are reluctant to wage a full-scale war against America or Europe. So because of that, we've seen how Iran reacts, whether America designated it, IRGC, as a terrorist group, or whether it was the assassination of Soleimani. Of course, Islamic Republic responded and retaliated, but it was always measured. It actually never went as far as taking American lives. And Europeans should know that. If they actually were to have a firm stand against the Islamic Republic, the regime is not in a place to retaliate that aggressively, especially for Europeans, given how widespread the Islamic Republic's terror network is across the continent, using both terrorist groups and local gangs. So it really is in their national security interest to truly designate the IRGC, which is a shared threat between Iranians and Europeans.
Now, just as a final question, I do want to ask you, we saw what happened with Venezuela and the U.S. administration arresting Maduro. I think it's given a lot of Iranians on the ground, at least that I've spoken to, some degree of hope, or it's what they would like to see for, or worse, for their leadership, criminal leadership, I should say. But I do want to ask you, you're in Washington, you're working with the U.S. government officials, educating them about what's happening in Iran. Do you think that there is an opportunity here for regime change? And I actually heard someone today speaking about this in relation to Venezuela, and they made a great point that regime change is probably the wrong word. It's actually a democratic transition, which is very much true for Iran as well. Whether or not the people ultimately choose democracy as their system of government, I guess it could be monarchy as well. But there's no question that this is what the people of Iran want based on what we've seen in multiple waves of protests. It will be their choice. Is there enough support from the West for an actual change of this regime in Iran?
I would say the recent protest wave really changed the calculus in Washington. There was a misunderstanding or really a miscalculation across Western leaders as a whole, but particularly Washington post the June war. They thought there would be a rally around the flag, but what we've seen so far is that absolutely the opposite. During the war, Iranians were actually cheering for Israeli strikes against the repression apparatus. And after the war, a few months later, we see Iranians rising up and effectively calling this regime really a total theocracy, calling for the death of Khamenei. So we have not seen that. And that I think, looking at the current protest wave, really changed the calculus in Washington as to what regime, as you mentioned, a democratic transition would look like. But in the case of Iran, we might also be heading towards actual regime collapse. So necessarily, we talk about foreign intervention a lot of times, but the incompetent leaders of the Islamic republics have really pushed the country towards the brink of collapse, given the economy and the mismanagement just inherently, and of course the environmental factors that again the Islamic Republic has really failed to address. So when we see the protests on the ground, it is very clear that the leadership of these protests, of course, greatly influenced by the Crown Prince itself, was able to really gain momentum from this nationalist sentiment. But when we look at Venezuela, we necessarily did not see the opposition have this much of a strong influence on the street as we see with Iran. And I think that's another great factor that would perhaps incentivize Western leaders to look at Iran differently. because the momentum is there. The people are calling for a leader. And when you look at Iranian society, of course, it's young, it's very educated, it is very looking forward to having Western values and cooperating with the West. They want to distance themselves from the current regime. So all the criteria is in place. It's really about just a single push from Washington, and of course, hopefully enabled by Israel, to really for us to, as you pointed out, go through this democratic transition away from a theocracy and open to a democratic and secular form of governance.
All right, we'll leave it at that. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Jonathan Saye, thank you so much for being here on Axis of Truth.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that about does it for this week on Axis of Truth. We'll be back next week with more updates on the situation in Iran and beyond. Hopefully by then, the whole regime will have fallen. We'll also have interviews and more stories from here in Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be sure to follow me on social media, Emily K. Schrader or Emily in Tel Aviv. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on Axis of Truth.